This video demonstrates knitting the tiny yoke. Each band is knit with a fair isle design and then progressively decreased across the row to create the shaping. We'll begin the band in a self-start 1x1 rib. Cast on and main yarn across 120 needles. Because we're working with an even number of needles, your end needles will be on opposing beds. After completing the zigzag row and the tubular course, knit 12 rows in 1x1 rib. After completing the 12 rows in rib, transfer all of the river beds to the opposing needle on the main bed. Drop the river bed, attach the single bed sinker plate, and increase the tension appropriate to single bed knitting. Knit one plain row in the main or ground color yarn. Install the second color and press the MC button on the carriage. Hang a clothespin on the end of the contrast color yarn and slip it between the beds to keep it in place. Begin your needle selection, pulling needles forward into forward working position that you want to knit in the second color. Follow the chart that you've developed. All of the needles, again, that are pulled to forward working position will pick up the second color. I made a little bit of a mistake here trying to work around the camera, and my second color wasn't quite in feeder B. Fortunately, it still knit okay. You can see the needles that picked up the white, or color B, the second color. And in this first section that I'm knitting, I'm creating vertical stripes. So I continue to select the same needles for the 12 rows of this band, row after row. If you lose track of the number of rows you've knit, count the floats. Here I've knit 4 rows of the 12 for this band. As you knit, you may realize that the ribber comb and barrel weights are a bit too much for single bed work. You can switch to claw weights and remove the ribber weights, but keep the comb in place. Once you've completed your 12 rows of patterning, cancel the MC cam. Remove the second color and break the yarn and knit one plain row. I didn't weight my yarn end or hold it down, so it got caught in the brushes of the sinker plate. Install a highly contrast waste yarn and knit 10 to 12 rows of waste knitting. Take the waste yarn out of the carriage and press the work off the machine by running the carriage across empty. Check your work, make sure that your pattern is knit as you expect it. And then from the purl side, begin hanging the last row of main yarn knitting back onto the machine. We're going to decrease across the row when we hang this back on. So while we may have started with 120 needles, we'll be working closer to about 80 in this round. Pick up the edge loop, then the next stitch, and then pick up the third stitch and hang it on the second needle. Then pick up a single stitch and then double the stitches up on the next needle. We'll work across the bed in this fashion. 1, 2, 1, 2. This will help us to decrease across the row and give that curved yoke shape that we're after. Once you get the hang of things, you can start picking up 2 stitches at a time using the double prong tool, and then doubling up the last stitch with the single prong end of the same tool. It's important here that you pick up every stitch, because once we remove the waste yarn, it's that next row that we'll knit on top of this that's the only thing keeping those stitches from running. Any stitches that you fail to pick up here will run once the waste yarn's taken out. After you've rehung all the stitches in that decreased pattern, reinstall the main yarn and knit one plain row. Hang your claw weights and then begin working your next 10 row band in pattern by manually selecting your needles. Once this 10 row section is complete, break and remove the contrast color and knit one plain row in your ground color. Switch to waste yarn and knit another 10 to 12 rows in waste knitting. Press off and prepare to repeat the same step in decreasing across the row, but this time over fewer needles even more. This time we're shooting for 53 or 54 stitches to be in work after we've rehung in that 1, 2, 1, 2 decrease across the row pattern. In checking my work, I've noticed that I've mispatterned and repeated a row twice in 2 spaces. Pay close attention to your chart, making sure that you're selecting the correct needles to achieve the pattern that you've developed. After rehanging and decreasing across the row, reinstall the grounds color and knit one plain row. Then work the final 8 row band or section of the yoke in the same manner that you have before, hand selecting the needles. once you've completed your patterned knitting, cut the contrast yarn and knit one plain row, then bind off around the gate pegs using the latch tool. Once off the machine, remove the waste yarn and double check your work. As usual, off the machine, things will be a little rolly, but as you can see by the blocked sample, it will lay nice and flat. The last bit that you'll need to knit is the neckband, and make sure that you knit that 1x1 band across the same number of needles you bound off across.